GOP donors back Manchin and Sinema as they reshape Biden's agenda. No surprise there, I guess, right? Over the summer, as he was working to scale back President Biden's domestic agenda, Senator Joe Manchin III of West Virginia traveled to an $18 million mansion in Dallas for a fundraiser that attracted Republican and corporate donors who have cheered on his efforts. In September, Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, who along with Mr. Manchin has been a major impediment to the White House's effort to pass its package of social and climate policy, stopped by the same home to raise money from a similar cast of donors for her campaign coffers. Even as Ms. Sinema and Mr. Manchin, both Democrats, have drawn fire from the left for their efforts to shrink and reshape Mr. Biden's proposal, they have won growing financial support from conservative-leaning donors and business executives in a striking display of how party affiliation can prove secondary to special interests and ideological motivations when the stakes are high enough. Ms. Sinema is winning more financial backing from Wall Street and constituencies on the right, in large part for her opposition to raising personal and corporate income tax rates. Mr. Manchin has attracted new Republican-leaning donors as he has fought against much of his own party to scale back the size of Mr. Biden's legislation and limit new social welfare components. Meanwhile, the majority of people in his states are poor. West Virginia is one of the poorest states, one of the sickest states, people with all sorts of ailments, whether it's opioids and so forth. And yet, he's doing just about everything, against what will benefit the people of his state. It's like you have to ask yourself. This is why some of these people are not really interested in people being educated, because if you're really educated, you're able to think for yourself. You're able to engage in critical thinking, educated people. And if you're really, really an educated person, a critical thinker, there is no way you could belong, go along or belong in a party that consistently pass laws against your own interests. So it is not unusual for well-heeled political activists and business interests to spread a smattering of cash across party lines. Representative Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, collected a handful of checks from major Democratic donors this year as she backed her party's leadership defense of former President Donald J. Trump. But the stream of cash to the campaigns of Ms. Sinema and Mr. Manchin from outside normal Democratic channels stands out because many of the donors have little history with them. The financial support is also notable for how closely tied it has been to their power over a single piece of legislation, the fate of which continues to rest largely with two senators because their party cannot afford to lose either of their votes in the evenly divided Senate. Their influence has been profound. The domestic policy bill, which would expand the social safety net and efforts to fight climate change, started out at 3.5 trillion and has been shrunk, mainly at the insistence of Mr. Manchin, to around 2 trillion. So that's $1.5 trillion cut off from the original bill, and still, Manchin is still giving them a hard time. It could get smaller as the Senate takes up the version passed on Friday by the House. New spending measures were originally to have been paid for mostly through tax rate increases on the wealthy and corporations, a component of the plan that had to be substantially rewritten because of Ms. Sinema's opposition. Let me just say something here. I remember when Susan Collins up in Maine was running for re-election, and they had somebody there, a progressive running, and she lost out. I think she was speaker of the House, something like that, in Maine. It would have been great if the other lady had won and Susan Collins had lost, because that means you wouldn't need somebody like Manchin, You would have maybe like just somebody like Sinema to fool around with and pick on, and just disregard Manchin if Susan Collins, and Susan Collins was the one who voted for the Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, and he said, "No, I'm not gonna, abortion, Roe versus Wade is all set, that's a law already set." And then he kind of surprisingly, when that Texas case went up the first time, he just left it like that. I mean, he could have made a difference. Just if he had got on board, it would have been 6-3, and said, "No, Texas, you can't pass a law like this. This is ridiculous." But he didn't do that. See, so Susan Collins was wrong, and it's a shame that Maine other senator, Senator King, he's an independent, but he votes for the Democrats, But yet, the people of Maine send back Susan Collins. I guess they believe, she's doing such a great job. But believe me, if she had lost and the person had replaced her, things would have been much, much different. And all this power that Manchin is exercising, the person from Maine would have been able to step in there and just push out Manchin. And then all they will have to do is beat up in Sinema, because Sinema is new in that post. And it would have been easier to put pressure on her and have her cave in eventually. And forget about Manchin. You wouldn't really need Manchin. So this month, the billionaire Wall Street investor Kennedy Langone, that sounds like the name of the hospital, Langone Hospital here in New York, Langone, a longtime Republican mega donor who has not previously contributed to Mr. Manchin, effusively praised him for showing guts and courage, and vowed to throw one of the biggest fundraisers I've ever had for him, right? Mr. Kenneth Langone. In a statement to the New York Times, Mr. Langone, who has given an overwhelming majority of his millions of dollars in federal political donations to Republicans, said, "My political contributions have always been in support of candidates who are willing to stand tall on principle, even when that means defying their own party or the press." Stanley S. Hubbard, a billionaire Republican donor, wrote his first check to Ms. Sinema in September and said that he was considering doing the same for Mr. Manchin because of their efforts to trim the sails of the Democrats' agenda. Those are two good people, Manchin and Sinema. Yeah, right. I could see the people of Arizona are so furious, because Arizona, I've been out there one time when I went to the Grand Canyon. Very hot, very, very hot. Over 100 degrees. And the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of people who supported Sinema went out and were knocking on doors. And you can imagine walking around in the heat in Arizona. When you walk there, it's like, wow, you could barely manage. So going from door to door in Arizona in the heat, knocking on doors to get support for Sinema, and this is what this is basically what she turned out to be, like a turncoat. Yeah. So she really pissed off a lot of people who support it. And even if she changed, even if she would have vote for it, these people will never vote for her again. And based on her history, she's not really a Republican. She was she's one of these green activists and so forth, believe in all this stuff, And Arizona is a state that needs a lot of water. It's not a state where you have a lot of. It's not like New York, where we have a lot of water coming from upstate, up in the mountains when snow melts and so forth. We have a lot of water here, or like Maine, for example. No. And we have great water here. They don't have the kind of water we have. So she's voting against. You look at the Hoover Dam. I think the Colorado River also. I think they get water from there. All this would help. This bill, for example, would help the state of Arizona with the problems they having with water and the agriculture and so forth. And she's standing in the way. So, good luck for her when she runs for re-election. I don't care how much money you got. You could put up all kinds of money. Just like in Maine. In Maine, the candidate who was running against Susan Collins, she was well funded. Yeah, that's what I read. She had a lot of money from outside groups because they were trying to defeat Susan Collins. And still, she lost. So it doesn't really matter how much money you got. It matters how people look at you. If people are for you, they're going to vote for you. So if they're not for her and she double crossed them already, then it really wouldn't matter. Chances are she might lose. Be a one-term senator. Okay, so cash has also poured in for Mr. Manchin and Ms. Sinema from political action committees and donors linked to the finance and pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. Manchin's daughter, from what I understand, works for a pharmaceutical company. Earns over $1 million a year. Right? And Sinema also is against the Medicare negotiating, which will make sense, right? The VA does it. The VA is allowed to negotiate prices to give to so the VA members can have lower drug prices. But for older people, Medicare is not allowed to negotiate. So that's a great deal that the pharmaceutical, and then they run in all these false ads about, people up from Canada, look what's happening up here in Canada, that if they allow Medicare to negotiate, it's going to be up in Canada, you may not be able to get certain drugs and this and that. That's not true. That's not true at all. Believe me, there are lots of drugs out there. And if you can't get them from Canada, you can get them from India, because India has a big drug industry. A big industry where they make generic drugs. And a lot of these drugs are generic too. When you look at them, Um, the whole and then I'm expired. Like I think it's about maybe like 10 years. The pharmaceutical companies have, and then after that, the drugs can go generic. So some of these some of these pills like diltiazem, for example, common blood pressure pill that people use, diltiazem, nifedipine. These are all drugs. These drugs are cheap. You make them like in India, you can get them for real cheap. There's no reason people got to be paying the kind of outrageous prices. Insulin, for example, we have a rush of diabetes. A lot of younger people are becoming diabetic. Type 2 diabetes, right? I read where a young guy, I think he was like in his 20s, his parents didn't even know because what happened, he was kicked off the insurance and he couldn't get his insulin. I believe he was living alone and he died. That should never happen. A guy in his 20s died because he can't afford the insulin. And insulin is not one of those kind of drugs, like some drugs you could say, well, I don't have enough money, I'm gonna, like maybe cholesterol pills. You could say, well, I have to buy food. I can't afford my cholesterol pills this month. But insulin is not like that. Insulin, if your blood sugar goes high, the only way you can get that down is with insulin. So insulin is definitely important. It's one of those drugs that should be out there. People shouldn't have to go to Canada to buy insulin. And that's the kind of drug, the insulin, that way out of proportion. And insulin been around for a long time. They've been making insulin for years and years and years. So there should be generic versions to make insulin. So the drug companies shouldn't be making a lot of money on insulin. It shouldn't be that expensive to be making insulin. But yet people are dying in America because they can't afford insulin. And these two people, Sinema and Manchin, are fooling around, So next time, anybody who drops dead because their blood sugar level went up high and they didn't have insulin in their refrigerator, you can remember Sinema and Manchin. So, let's say which opposed proposals initially included in the domestic policy bill that the lawmakers helped scale back, including changes to Medicare and the tax rate increases. And they don't want to raise taxes on the super wealthy too. So who are you going to get money from them? John LaBombard, a spokesman from the Sinema, rejected any suggestion that campaign cash factored into her approach to policy making. Yeah, right, sure. She was a lead negotiator on the bipartisan infrastructure deal that Mr. Biden signed last week. By the way, I heard a bunch of people who work for her that are veterans. They quit. They quit working for her. They're so disgusted for her. These are veterans, people who were in the United States Armed Forces, who believed in her, and they saw how greedy and disgusted she is and how she's won over by the corporations and the drug companies, that they retired and they resigned in disgust. And during her time in the Senate, she has positioned herself as an ideologically flexible centrist willing to back her party in representing. People don't need this kind of nonsense, this ideological thing. When you have people who need drugs, especially like older people who need to pay for their drugs, and they have a choice between food and they need certain pharmaceuticals, And she doesn't have that kind of issue, okay? So when somebody lives longer than they plan, like somebody in the 80s or 90s, you didn't think you probably lived that long, but here you are. What are you going to do? And you need to pay for certain drugs. Even though they have Medicare, but remember, Medicare has like Part A, Part B, Part D, so you still have to pay. It's not like everything is free, except if you're on Medicaid or something like that. So if you're an old person living in your own home in Arizona, and Arizona has lots of houses, not like New York City, where people renting like in Brooklyn. Okay, then what are the chances you're going to be able to get on Medicaid? Because Medicaid is for people who don't really have assets. So if you live in your home as an old person, you're 85 years old, then you're not really going to have access to Medicaid. That'd be like for somebody who doesn't have assets, who has no home, or so forth. So a lot of these older people living in their own home, and they want to have dignity, but because they have a property, they're not going to get that break where they have they qualify for Medicaid, which would really make a difference. So that's a problem right there. And this woman can help solve that, because I'm sure Arizona has a lot of older people. I mean, it's a state that's dry. Some people retire, they go there because of the sunshine, because it helps like with allergies. One place I worked, one man, he had I think property out in Arizona, and he used to suffer from allergies here in New York, and he used to go out to Arizona, and once he's out in Arizona, he felt better. You see? So I'm sure right now he's retired and he's probably living in Arizona. Okay, so so he said here, Senator Sinema makes decisions based on one consideration: what's best for Arizona. Yeah. Well, the people who back her, they don't think so. The people in Arizona. They think she's making decisions what's best for her. Mr. Manchin's office did not respond to requests for comment, but he has long expressed concern that the legislation, if not paid back to the level he's seeking, would add to the budget deficit and could fuel. Yeah, he's worried about inflation. Come on, I mean, really. If you look at some of the legislation, it's going to end up paying for itself, because people will be able to get out there, work, like women who don't have child care, for example. They would be able to go to work, right, have somebody take care of their kid, and pay taxes, and that would bring in revenue. Because we saw that during the pandemic, a lot of women lost their jobs. If you have children, and then some of these schools were closed too. They had remote learning. So if you have remote learning, you're learning from home. Who's going to stay home with the kids? Most likely, the impact was dramatic, and mostly women. So Manchin is really being nonsensical, because this bill has a lot to do with child care. It can help a lot, like pay for child care. And once you have that, then a lot of women can go out there and work. They don't have to bother. But some of them, well, if you pay for child care, then what's the point going out and work? You may not earn enough money. But if you qualify, then you can at least go out there and work, and somebody's taking care of your child while you're working. So the lawmakers share campaign finance consultant who helped organize fundraising strings through Texas for both lawmakers that yielded cash from Republican donors as well as a fundraiser from the cinema in Washington in late September, with business lobbying groups that oppose the domestic policy bill. Nelson Pulse, a billionaire investor who brought a Republican-heavy group of chief executives to have lunch with Mr. Manchin in Washington a few months ago, said the senator understands that you can't spend, and feel there's no recourse for it. Yeah, well, how about Trump with his tax cut, 2017, right? He did a tax cut whereby mostly rich people got breaks. It was supposed to use that money, help hire more people. That didn't happen. And then he blew a hole in the budget. So he's running a big deficit. So like over 25% or so of the U.S. About 25% or so of the U.S. budget, yearly budget, is running in a deficit, and that's because Trump's tax cut. He cut taxes, and he had nothing. Usually, if you cut here, you're supposed to come up with something to pay for it. He came up with nothing. So what he's doing is like borrowing money from Wall Street to pay for the cut that he made. So what about Manchin? Manchin was around when that happened. What did he do about that? So he's worried now. What about when Trump did that? And the Republicans had no problem whatsoever when that was happening. You see? So I believe it's like about $1.9 trillion that the tax cut, which is a lot of money. And how are you going to pay for that? It's not being paid for. It's borrowed money. So now they're trying to change that back and raise the tax back to a fairer level. And these two people, Sinema and Manchin, don't want to do it. And these rich Republicans are helping to give them money so they don't agree to change the tax law to tax the rich. And this is what's going on. These people already earn billions of dollars, but yet they feel that they're entitled and they don't want to pay taxes. And that's why they're giving money to these two people. Individual donors like Mr. Pulse, who over the years has donated nearly 3 times as much to Republicans as he has to Democrats at the federal level, offered the 2 Democratic senators a way to restock their campaign coffers, brought her up for re-election in 2024. Yeah, at a time when that's when most people come out to vote, at a time when they're unlikely to get an enthusiastic reception from some more traditional Democratic donor. No, why should they? In 2024. That's when the presidential election is, and that's when most people come out to vote. And they're going to remember Manchin, and they're going to remember Sinema. And after 2024, they'll probably be voted out of office. Mr. Manchin has long been to the right of his party on items on litmus test issues like abortion rights and fossil fuels, while Ms. Sinema started her political career as a liberal activist before shifting to the center. One Wall Street executive joked that in his industry, Ms. Sinema, who as a young politician once likened political donations to bribery, was now referred to as Saint Sinema for opposing most of Mr. Biden's proposed taxes on the wealthy. She has, however, supported a 15% corporate minimum tax and other revenue-raising measures that will help pay for Mr. Biden's legislative spending. Progressives are less amused and have accused both senators of undermining their party's agenda at the behest of special interests. Wealthy liberals recently began an effort to lay the groundwork for a primary challenge to Ms. Sinema in 2024, and the liberal group Demand Progress wrote in a petition that a small group of right-wing Democrats backed by corporate cash, including Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, are trying to destroy Mr. Biden's legislative agenda. This year, Mr. Manchin and Ms. Sinema have received donations from major Republican donors who had never before given to them, including James A. Haslam III, who owns the Cleveland Browns football team, and the Dallas real estate developer Harlan Crow, who is close to Justice Clarence Thomas of the Supreme Court. Biden's social policy bill at a glance. Okay, I won't get into that, but it's right here. If anybody wants to read that, right there.